Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dr. Shubhra Singh is currently the Deputy Director at the Center for Sponsored Research and Consultancy and Assistant Professor at the Crystal Growth Center, Anna University. Her work in material science, particularly in energy, environmental applications, has earned her wide recognition in the academic community. With over 100 research publications, a prestigious honors including the Fellow of Academy of Sciences, Chennai, and collaborations with institutions such as the University of Sydney, she has made remarkable contributions to both research and academia. Beyond research, Dr. Singh has actively promoted science through initiatives such as the DST-sponsored Karyashala, mentoring young researchers through the Academy of Sciences, Chennai, Leadership for Women in STEM. A trained mentor for leadership for women in STEM, she has organized several mentoring and leadership training programs across universities. Along this, she has contributed immensely to university administration and academic development. So without further ado, Dr. Shubhra Singh, the stage is yours. Let us welcome her with a wide round of applause.
So the first topic is in line with what is our requirement currently. What is our requirement? You know the current situation in West Asia, right? What is the situation? So we need some alternative, and this is one alternative which is feasible or maybe achievable in the near future. And government of India has already recognized this field, and they've been, I think last few years, they have been funding a lot on the green hydrogen mission, the green mission basically, which involves one of the fields of hydrogen. So hydrogen, as you know, this is a basic property of hydrogen. It's the most abundant chemical structure in universe. It was first discovered in 1766. The word hydrogen comes from generation of water. And the first industrial water electrolyzer was also developed in 1888. So it's almost more than a century back. But still, we have a problem in having industrial electrolyzers. So what are those challenges? What are the material involved? And why do we actually need hydrogen? And that is what we are going to see in this talk. If you have any questions, we can take it towards the end. Okay, last 5 minutes, because as I said, we are late today. So let's, if there's nothing specific, we can keep it towards the end. If you still want to disturb me, you can do that, no problem. So as I said, we are more specifically focusing on green hydrogen. So what is this green hydrogen? Have you seen a hydrogen which is green in color? Is this green hydrogen? Huh? All we know from chemistry is that hydrogen is supposed to be colorless. But we have been saying green hydrogen everywhere. So what is a green hydrogen? Any idea? Just a guess. You don't have to, this is not a question answer session. Renewable, very good. So renewable is you use renewable energy for producing hydrogen, and you call it as green hydrogen. So since we are calling green hydrogen, obviously you would be having different other colors also. What are those other colors of hydrogen? Supposedly colors of hydrogen is gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen. So gray hydrogen is basically, the color also is dull. So this is because it is coming mostly from the source of energy here is the fossil fuels. Okay, and it produces a lot of CO2. So carbon dioxide emission is very high in case of gray hydrogen. Okay, and this is the most industrially used hydrogen or produced hydrogen currently. But the disadvantage is it produces a lot of CO2, which is not desirable, obviously. Okay, if you want to reduce, increase renewable energy consumption and reduce fossil fuel consumption, grey hydrogen is not desirable. But that is what is everybody doing now. Okay, because we have technology for that. We don't have sufficient scalable technology for other types of hydrogen production, especially green hydrogen, and that is why R&D or DST, Government of India is funding a lot on research for green hydrogen production. The second one is blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen is the same, but the only difference is greenhouse gases are trapped and stored. What do you mean by trapping and storing of greenhouse gases? So the gas which is emitted here is CO2. So you need to, there are technologies where you can actually trap the CO2. It's called CO2 capture, and then store it away. Store it in any, that is a different technology which deals with carbon dioxide capture and storage, where there are different methods. There are materials which can actually capture CO2, and then it is stored either below sea level or below, earth, or different layers of soil. So those are technologies which come under CCS, or carbon dioxide capture and storage. If grey hydrogen production method is integrated with CCS, you call it as blue hydrogen, because there the emission is not there. Emission is there, but it's not visible in the atmosphere. You capture it and store it somewhere. But again, it is not green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is specifically where CO2 is not emitted. So you need the source of energy which you need here is something which is renewable energy. For example, solar panels. So green hydrogen uses electrolysis. All of these methods actually use electrolysis. So electrolysis, we'll see a little later what are the basics of electrolysis. You need a source of energy there. So the source of energy, if it is renewable energy, like solar panel here, okay, in that case you can use the bias produced from the energy which is stored via solar panels, and then produce hydrogen which is stored and then used for other applications. For example, here they're using it in fuel cell to run a fuel cell. So the energy source which is used is a renewable energy. Renewable energy can be wind, it can be solar light, hydropower, anything. Emission is zero carbon emission. You don't have any CO2 emission because there is no fossil fuel burning here. Again, the key idea is to keep it renewable and sustainable. The grey hydrogen, as I said, is one of the methods which is being used by industries currently. The first one is the steam methane. So there are two steps involved. Methane reacts with steam at a high temperature, produces carbon monoxide plus hydrogen. The second step is called the water gas shift reaction. Do you have a pointer or something there? No, because this won't work. It's LED screen. Pointer. So this is this produces CO2. Obviously, you can see in the reaction itself it produces CO2. This is grey hydrogen emission, which produces lots of CO2, and currently the most common and cheapest form of hydrogen production. Okay. Now coming to blue hydrogen again, as I said, so in this case you will see that the production method is same. It's the same steam reform reaction which we have seen in the previous slide, but the CO2 which is produced is stored somewhere. In this case, it is stored below soil. Okay, there are materials like zeolites or calcium oxide which can actually capture CO2, convert into calcium carbonate, or zeolites are porous materials which can capture CO2 and they are stored away. Okay, so that is CCS, or carbon dioxide capture and storage. If you integrate this with the production of hydrogen and produce get the hydrogen output, that is the blue hydrogen. Okay. Now, if you compare, obviously, which one is the most sustainable one? The first one, green. Grey is the worst. We know that. So basically, we At there, we know now what is green hydrogen, blue hydrogen and grey hydrogen. But there are some more beyond these three classifications. Few more forms of hydrogen. Can you guess any one? Out of all the colors, you know? Red. Red is not there. Black. Yes, we have black, white. Okay, so some of you are right. Yellow hydrogen is actually a subset of renewable hydrogen or the green hydrogen we have seen, because it's solar powered electrolysis, renewable driven, but since specifically solar powered. Green hydrogen, you will have all forms of renewable energies like wind energy, etc. In this case, yellow hydrogen, it's only solar panel powered or solar light powered electrolysis which you have. Then black hydrogen, somebody said black hydrogen, yes, it is a part, again a subset of grey hydrogen. Coal, if the source is only coal or lignite based, then they have very high CO2 emission, and that is the most polluting form of hydrogen. Pink hydrogen. Any guesses? So this is nuclear powered hydrogen, turquoise hydrogen, which is methane pyrolysis, and you have a solid carbon byproduct. There is no CO2 emission, but methane pyrolysis is high temperature pyrolysis or breaking up of methane. Okay, that is one of the emerging technology, because I said you already have technology in industries for grey hydrogen, and that is very close to that. Okay, high temperature production or pyrolysis. So turquoise hydrogen is an emerging technology, but is nowhere close to green hydrogen production. Pink hydrogen is nuclear powered electrolysis, low carbon emission. White hydrogen is something which has not been exploited. So some of the researchers have actually found geological reserves where you have naturally occurring hydrogen, but those are not explored till now. Okay, so these are the various forms of hydrogen based on the production method or forms of existence. Let us come to something which is more important now. You have heard of carbon footprint. You have heard of any other footprint which you have heard of? Water footprint. All of you know about water footprint? So CO2 footprint, all of us are aware. Similarly, you have water footprint. We have hydrogen footprint. Hydrogen footprint actually calculates the total environmental impact of producing, transporting, and then using. So all the emission or CO2 emission which is involved in the entire process, right, from the production to the usage, in terms of greenhouse emission. Again, it is calculated in terms of CO2 emission, but this is specifically for hydrogen production and usage. So what does it include? It includes the emission, CO2 emission, which is during production of hydrogen. Energy source, if you are using coal, what is the emission there? And then the leakage effects. While storing, you must, if you have any sort of leakage, and for that leakage of hydrogen, what was the amount of CO2 which was emitted and wasted? All these come under hydrogen footprint. It's calculated again in terms of kg CO2 equivalent of per kg production of hydrogen. Okay, so again, when you calculate, it is in terms of kg CO2 for 1 kg of hydrogen. So as you know, logically, grey hydrogen will obviously have the highest hydrogen footprint. Blue hydrogen, because it depends on carbon capture efficiency, so it's lesser than that, and then even less is for green hydrogen. So this is a hydrogen footprint which we should be aware of, because if you want to promote green hydrogen future, you should be aware of what is a hydrogen footprint. Now, if you have two hydrogen supplies, let's say you get two hydrogen cylinders, one of it, and both of it are labeled as green. One of them has been produced using solar power, the other one using grid. okay, which is actually powered by coal. So even though it has used grid, if it's using grid, you will say that no, since it is using just electricity, there is no CO2 emission, but actually the power through the grid has come through coal. Okay, so it's actually not, even though it is labeled as green, it can have very different hydrogen footprint if you calculate from the production to the usage. So even if both are labeled as green, the actual footprint calculation will tell you the real story with which one is more greener than the other, or whether it is actually green hydrogen. Is it clear? Okay, so India's energy use is going to get doubled by 2040. You know, there is a continuously increasing demand, and over 80% of fossil fuel based energy mix will be what we require till 2040. So we are at a very high energy security risk, and we are seeing that even now. If you want to reduce this risk, what are you supposed to do? You have to depend more on renewable energy. One of the options, obviously, is green hydrogen. And the main industries which you need to focus on are these industries, which are basically called hard to abate industries, because they are heavily dependent on fossil fuels. What are those industries? Steel industry, fertilizer industry, refineries, and heavy transport. Among these four, which are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, two of them have hydrogen as the feedstock. That means hydrogen is directly used to produce ammonia, that is in the fertilizer industry. It is also used for crude oil refining in the refineries. So hydrogen is also used as a feedstock. It is also used as a source of energy. So these are the four very important industries where India needs to focus on. Let us go to this bar graph also. What does it show here? For green hydrogen, if you see here, this is the CO2 price. So green hydrogen, there is no CO2 emission. This is the CO2 emission which you have in grey hydrogen, blue hydrogen. The fuel cost is almost similar in these two, whereas it's very high in green hydrogen. That is one reason why most of the industries shy away from production of green hydrogen, because they have very high, they have to pay a very high cost for same amount of fuel production. The capital expenditure, what is capital expenditure? One-time investment. If you want to create or you want to have a production for green hydrogen, the initial capital which you need to invest is the capital expenditure. Then comes the operating expenditure. To continuously produce that green hydrogen, what is the operating expenditure? So the capital expenditure is also high. Fuel cost is also high for green hydrogen. That is one reason why industries don't focus on that. But if you want to save your environment and be at a lower risk of a lower energy security risk, you need to focus on this. So that is why government has been focusing a lot on the green hydrogen capacity installation, even though it costs a lot initially. Currently, in Gujarat, you have blue hydrogen plants. The National Thermal Power Corporation also has a 1.5 gigawatt electrolyzer manufacturing hub in Gujarat. And then Adani's group has a Gujarat solar powered hub. Currently, other than that, you have, there are some clusters and targets which are coming up, especially in Odisha, where they are looking at steel decarbonization, that is decarbonization of steel plants. Assam, biohydrogen and refineries, and then the solar hydrogen production, which is coming up in Gujarat and Rajasthan. These are the states where the government has identified sites where you can have renewable capturing, because sunlight is more, wind energy is more. These are the coastal regions you can see. So you can use those for renewable hydrogen production. Okay. So with all those data, let us come back to the basics again. How many of you know what is electrolysis? You have done this in school, okay? So that is what we are going back to. So it's nothing but electric flow of electrical current in a conducting solution or a molten liquid, which can initiate chemical changes. Now those chemical changes can have the desired effect depending on the nature of liquid or electrolyte material, electrolytes or electrodes. You can have gas production or gas bubbles, solid production, new solutions. All these depend on the cell structure. Now here, when you have a molten liquid or a conducting solution and you dip two metals, then connect it through a external circuit, what do you expect the electrons to flow from? And if you are providing an external bias, you expect the electrons to flow from one of the electrodes to the other side. So that is, if electrodes flow away from this, it's an anode which can attract anions, cathode which attracts cations. So cathode becomes the negatively charged electrode, anode is the positively charged electrode. And then since it's a positive charged one, it will attract anions. This is negatively charged one, so it attracts cations. Now, the whole idea behind electrolysis is you have two electrodes, cathode and anode. If you provide an external bias, ions start conducting in the electrolyte solution, that is a solution which you have here. And in electrolysis, when it is especially acidic or alkaline, you will see hydrogen and oxygen production. This is a simple schematic of electrolysis of water, the reaction which is involved here. This is the full reaction which is involved here. If you take only one electrolyte, or in this case, if you consider, reactions, only in this case, this is a half cell. If you consider reaction only for this, the other electrode, this is again a half cell. So two half cell reactions are mentioned here. At the anode, the reaction which is taking place is, anode is something where water gets oxidized. Oxygen evolution takes place. Okay. Whereas cathode is where hydrogen is, H plus is reduced to hydrogen because electrons come. So electrons are generated from here and they combine with H plus and produce hydrogen. That is what is happening at the cathode. So these are the two electrodes. At the anode, you have oxygen production. At the cathode, hydrogen production. You have an external power source. Okay. Now, if you have only water, whether electrolysis takes place in pure water? No? Why? It will take place, but it's very slow. Okay, it will definitely take place because you're breaking, see, hydrogen, water breaking into hydrogen and oxygen. You can provide external bias, break it into hydrogen and oxygen, but it's very slow. It is not at all desirable to have such a slow reaction, and that is why you add sulfuric acid. Basically, why do you add sulfuric acid? To increase the concentration of H plus ions. Okay, so that is what you know of. If you make it little acidic, the concentration of ions increase, and that is how you get a highly efficient hydrogen production. Is there any other way of producing hydrogen other than just adding H plus ions? Acid and salt. Acid is what we have already said. Other than acid, have you heard of alkaline electrolyzers? So the alkaline electrolyzers are something where electrolytes are alkaline in nature. Okay. So now here, if you see, so what we have seen here, if in case you are adding H plus or acid, as she said, it is a acid electrolyzer. When you have an electrolyzer, the two electrodes which are there, even if it's these are two metals, we call one of them as cathode, the other one as anode. What is the basic function? Cathode is the electrode where reduction occurs, reduction of H plus to hydrogen. Okay. Anode electrode where oxidation is occurring. So water is oxidized to oxygen. So for this reaction or splitting to occur, there is an energy involved. Any idea of what is that energy called? What is the value of that energy? It's an uphill reaction. Okay, thermodynamically, splitting of water is a uphill reaction. So you need to give energy to the system. What is that energy? It's around 1.23 electron volts. Okay, so most of the systems, if this 1 point, even if you have this 1.2, so basically if you have cathode and anode, these are two different materials. So they have a Fermi level difference. If this difference is around 1.23 electron volt, your reaction should occur. But in most of the cases, what happens is due to different effects. You have electrode effects, you have interfaces, you have some electrolytes. There are many other parameters which come into effect, and because of that, even this 1.23 is not, the level difference of 1.23 is not sufficient. So you need to give an extra potential, and that is called the over potential for the reaction to initiate and to continue. Okay, that is the over potential of any electrolysis cell. So that is what we have is written here, over potential requirement. It should be for a cathodic over potential. That means for the reaction to occur at the cathode, the over potential should be low. Whereas again for anode, the half cell at anode, if the reaction has to occur there, for that also you should have the anode should be such that it should have a preferably low anodic over potential. Electron flow, cathode receives electron, that is how it reacts with H plus and produces hydrogen. You've seen this here. Okay, at the cathode, you will have hydrogen production because it's receiving electron. So that's why it receives electrons. On the other hand, everything is opposite for most of the activities. You will see anode will release electrons. It promotes reduction reaction. Anode promotes oxidation reaction. Electrical conductivity, obviously, it should allow electron to flow through it. So it should have a higher electrical conductivity. Stability should be high because the H plus harsh conditions are there. You add acid or you add alkaline, those are harsher conditions. So if it's not stable, chemically the electrode material will degrade over time. Okay. Catalytic activity. What do you mean by catalytic activity? These are sites. There are active sites. The sites are called active sites where the reaction rate is higher, and those are called and that is why the material should have certain catalytic activity. You can increase the catalytic activity by increasing the surface area of the material. Okay. So catalytic activity means the material is such that it can increase the rate of the reaction due to its property. It acts as a catalyst. Again, these are other criteria which a cathode and anode should satisfy. Most of the common materials which are used as cathode are copper, nickel, stainless steel, graphite and platinum. These are all metal-based materials. Again, since we are talking about metal electrodes, all these options which you see are metal-based electrodes here. Now, if you want to improve on that, what are the other alternatives which you can have? You can have semiconducting materials. Why do we use semiconductors as electrodes? Because they have higher advantages in catalytic activity. They are more corrosion resistance. They have a light absorption capacity. So basically, if you see photoelectrochemical cells, these semiconductors can absorb light because they have a band gap. You know about the band gap of a material. Metals don't have a band gap. Their conduction and valence bands overlap. Semiconductors have a band gap. Okay, so they can actually absorb light depending on the band gap they have. If it's a narrow band gap, it is a visible light active material. If it is a wide band gap, it is UV light. Wide band gap means higher energy. So it can absorb only UV. If it is lower band gap, it can absorb visible also. So for photoelectrochemical based electrolysis, you need materials which are light active. Metals cannot take part in photoelectrochemical ones. So that's why we choose semiconductor based electrodes in many of these cases. So these are the properties which anode materials and cathode materials satisfy as when they are semiconducting in nature. Most of the anode materials that you have should have an N-type semiconducting property, whereas P-type semiconductors or even conductive catalysts are used as cathode materials. Okay. Other properties are mostly similar to what we have seen there, except there are few more differences, like anode should have a strong oxygen evolution reaction catalytic activity. So the half reaction which is occurring at the anode side should be able to have a strong oxygen evolution reaction, because that is how oxygen will be evolved there. If that is sluggish, then the entire efficiency of the entire cell is going to be affected. Similarly, cathode, because that is where your hydrogen is produced, so it should have a strong hydrogen evolution reaction activity. HER activity should be high in cathode, OER activity should be higher in anode. Okay, so again the surface sites we have mentioned already. What are the surface sites? If you have a higher surface area, the catalytic sites are are plenty, and that is where electron transfer can take place faster, and that you can achieve only if you increase the increase the surface area of the material. Okay, we will know how to increase the surface area in the next lecture, that is post T. Okay. Now that we know already, these are some of the desired properties which you should have, especially when your semiconducting electrodes are being used. The suitable band gap which can enable visible light utilization. So visible light can be used only when the band gap is narrow. Why narrow? Lower band gap value. Okay. Yes, they will also move when they have a little higher, that is UV, but the light which it can absorb for a narrow band gap will be visible light. And why do we stress on visible light utilization? Yes, so the percentage of visible light is about 40% in electromagnetic radiation, which about sunlight when it falls. UV is around 5%, whereas 40% of visible light is present in the electromagnetic radiation. So if you have a material which is visible light active, you will have a higher efficiency which you can achieve, because 40% of the light is being utilized instead of just 5%. So whenever you consider a photoactive material as an electrode, we look for materials which have lower band gap. Okay. Okay. Low recombination rate. Why do we need low recombination rate? What is the electromagnetic spectra? Rest of it, you have many other. You are aware of the electromagnetic radiation, this one? You have infrared, you have microwaves, you have X-rays, you have gamma rays. Okay? Okay. So, yes, low recombination rate. What is this recombination? Why am I using this recombination rate? So basically, if you go back, let me go to another diagram. Yeah. So this is something which is a basic schematic diagram of a photoelectrochemical electrolysis. So when sunlight is, see, in this case, we are not providing any external bias. Can you see any battery connected there? No. So what is happening in this case? The basic bias which is there is because of the Fermi level difference of these two materials. Okay, the energy levels are different. These two are different materials. The electrode which is anode and the cathode, are two different materials. So their energy levels are at a different level. But you need to have electrons, only then it will flow. Where are these electrons coming from? When sunlight is incident on the material. So the material is photoactive. Let's say it's a narrow bandgap material. So that is going to absorb visible light. Okay. If it absorbs light, electron hole pairs are produced. So you're actually giving light energy. It breaks the bonds. Electron hole pairs are produced. Now these electrons, because of the internal Fermi level difference of these two materials, these electrons flow from one electrode to the other. Holes participate in a different way. We'll see that later again. Okay. So holes can, again, if it is a proton exchange membrane, these holes, the protons can actually go to from the side. Protons from here can come to the cathode and react with electron, produce hydrogen. So that is a complete reaction. So basically photoelectrochemical cells use photon and produce electron holes. And obviously if electron has to come to the outer circuit, it can't again recombine. So the electron hole recombination rate should be less. That is what is mentioned in this case. It should have a low recombination rate. Once you produce the electrons and hole, it should not combine again. So that is why you need materials for low recombination rate. Again, the other characteristics is something which we have seen already: chemically stable in harsh conditions, high catalytic activity, obviously low cost materials if you want to scale it up. Okay. So for semiconducting materials based electrolyzers, the most preferred stable anodes are TiO2, bismuth vanadate, iridium oxide, ruthenium oxide, whereas cathode you have molybdenum disulfide, platinum. This is a metal alloy, two different metals, bimetallic alloy, copper oxide. Okay. This is a p-type material. This is a two-dimensional material with high surface area. Platinum is the benchmark material. It's the best cathode which is available till now, but it is very, very costly. Okay. TiO2 is a UV active material. It is a semiconductor, but it has a wide band gap, but you can always tune the band gap of the material by adding some impurity. Because it's a semiconductor, you can add external impurity and make it a narrow band gap. You can play around with its band gap. Similarly, bismuth vanadate, visible light active material. So these are the preferred materials, but currently water electrolysis specifically includes these two, and both of these are very costly. Iridium oxide, ruthenium oxide are very costly anodes. Best industrial, as I said, platinum, which is the benchmark, nickel, molybdenum alloys. Best low-cost photocatalysts. So photocatalysts, as I said, titanium oxide, hematite, which is iron oxide, which are visible light active. But catalysis or producing hydrogen in photocatalysts is something which has not been explored till now industrially. Okay, research level. At the research level, you have many studies, but it has not been explored in wide scale. Okay, so green hydrogen, again coming back to that, now you know what is electrolysis, splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen using either metal based electrodes or semiconducting based electrodes. Now, if you have an acidic solution, as I said, when you have an acidic solution or the electrolyte is acidic, you already have excess of H plus because it's an acidic solution. As she said, if you add H2SO4, you have more H plus. So if you have more H plus, what happens? It need not do extra work. The incoming electrons will already combine with this H plus, produce hydrogen. That is what happens when you have a acidic electrolyte. And this is the hydrogen evolution reaction or HER. What happens on the other side in case of acidic solution? On the anode side, you have water. This water is oxidized to oxygen. That is, oxygen is produced, H plus, and electrons are also produced. This is the electron which comes from the outer circuit to the cathode side. Okay. Now, if you have an alkaline solution, that is, instead of acidic electrolyte, if you have an alkaline based electrolyte, what are the reactions here? Now you don't have H plus, you don't have excess H plus here. So what happens? The cathode has to do an extra work. It basically takes water itself and splits it. Using the same electrodes, it is splitting it into hydrogen and alkaline hydroxyl ion. These hydroxyl ions again combine and get oxidized to oxygen and producing water as well as generating electrons. So the two reactions here which you see at the bottom are in the case of an electrolyte which is alkaline in nature. The other two in the top are the half reactions in the case of acidic electrolyte. Okay, in both these cases, you can generate hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen at the cathode, oxygen at the anode. So these are the reactions again mentioned here, which you see. Now, when you specially use alkaline electrolysis, or even in some cases acidic electrolysis, there are certain requirements which you have. And that one requirement is a requirement of a membrane. So membrane basically allows only that specific type of ion which you need. If it is H plus and if you have a proton exchange membrane, it will allow only the H plus. Okay, so the unnecessary, it avoids any other reactions which are not desirable. That increases the efficiency because it's allowing only H plus to come on the other side. Similarly, if it is alkaline based, what are the ions which are involved here? OH minus. So you should have the same proton exchange membrane will not allow OH minus. So you should have membranes which will allow OH minus. Okay. So those are, they have a special name for that. Those are alkaline anion exchange membranes. Okay. Which is different from proton exchange membranes. Okay, so let's go back to this. So this is again, this is an amphoteric electrolysis. That is, you have both acidic and alkaline based production of hydrogen and oxygen. So in this case, you have hydrogen H plus excess and hydrogen evolution in an acidic environment. In this case, if it's an alkaline environment, OH minus getting oxidized and producing oxygen. Okay, this is something which we have seen already. Coming back to, again, the different, this we have seen already, but there, based on this, we can again go through different types of electrolysis cells which are available or currently being developed. The first one which you see is an alkaline water electrolyzer. So alkaline water, as I said, the electrolyte which is there is alkaline in nature. So you use alkaline electrolytes, the first one, they are cost effective and have long lifetime. But the current density is low. So because of that, if you want to improve on that, many of them use now anion exchange membrane electrolyzers. What is it? We'll know this after the second one. So proton exchange membrane electrolyzer is something where you use solid polymers as an exchange membrane. As I said, when H plus is produced, here, in this case, this H plus has to come to the side for it to get reduced and produce hydrogen. See, basically, in the acidic case, water gets oxidized to oxygen, produces H plus. This H plus, if it comes here, only then it can get reduced and produce hydrogen. So when it has to come here, if you have a proton exchange membrane, it will allow, so basically you are creating a compartment. If there is no membrane, all the ions from this side basically can move around. But if you have a membrane, from here only H plus ions can move to this and then react with or combine with electron, get reduced and produce hydrogen. So in this case, this is a proton exchange membrane electrolyzer. These are solid polymer membranes. They have they actually allow high current density and high purity oxygen because it is allowing only H plus on the other side. But they are very expensive. Mostly they use Nafion membranes, which is difficult to get. Okay, there are only few companies, not in India. You get it imported, and because you have raw material shortage in many of these cases, the availability or long run use of PEM based membrane is questionable. The third one is a solid oxide electrolyzer. So it's again an electrolyzer, but everything is solid here. Even the electrolyte is a solid electrolyte. Okay. So this is a solid oxide electrolysis. The membrane is solid, electrolyte is solid. Obviously the cathode and the anode or electrodes are also solid in nature. But since this is solid, the operative temperature the temperature at which it can work is very high. It can work only at temperatures above 700 degrees Celsius. So only in some specific applications you can use this. Why does it work at that temperature? Because the conduction of ions in these solid materials can take place only at high temperatures. Okay, ionic conductivity, normally if you talk about ionic conductivity in these materials, takes place only at high temperatures, and that is the reason why it can operate only at higher temperatures. So that is one big disadvantage of solid oxide electrolyzers. Then comes anion exchange, which is an upcoming system. So here it is a combination of first two. What was the first one? First one was the alkaline water electrolyzer, which was without any membrane. But if you bring a membrane into picture, and that is the anion exchange membrane, not the proton exchange membrane. Because in alkaline, what is the ion which is taking part in the reaction? It is OH minus. So OH minus ion, for OH minus ions movement, you need anion exchange membrane. So if anion exchange membrane is involved in the first one, then you get anion exchange membrane electrolyzer. So in that case, it has a combined role of an alkaline system as well as a PEM system. PEM system means you are having a membrane here, not exactly the proton exchange membrane, but anion exchange membrane. So you have a membrane and the electrolyte is alkaline in nature. The membrane is an anion exchange membrane, so it allows only OH minus movement. Okay, so that is what is currently being the emerging technology. Other than that, in some cases, not many cases, you have microbial electrolysis cells. These are systems or electrolyzers where you use microorganisms. So they basically react with the wastewater, the organics which are present in wastewater, and produce and help in hydrogen production. Okay, we will not go into detail, but this is just the basic idea. You can have a basic idea of what is a microbial electrolysis cell. So as you can see at the anode, hydrolysis or breaking of cellulose, glucose, lignin, these are the organics. Most of these organics come from the wastewater treatment plants. So microbial fuel cells, electrolysis cells are something which are used to produce hydrogen from wastewater. Okay. Now we have seen that the requirements for green hydrogen production or for electrolyzers, and we have also seen the capital expenditure. The initial investment which is required is high. Why is it that? So because most of it requires iridium, ruthenium oxide, platinum, which are all costly metals. Obviously, even if they have high activity, they have low stability in harsh conditions, and it is followed by other effects like corrosion. So if it is a harsh condition, it undergoes corrosion, oxidation, and in some cases when you use membrane, there's something called membrane fouling, where when the exchange is happening, if the water is not clean, it can clog the pores, it can degrade the membrane. Okay, all those conditions or parameters actually lead to the bottlenecks, and because of which we are not able to scale it up. So you should have alternatives which are low cost. For example, any of these abundant materials or transition metals which you see there, if iron, nickel, cobalt, obviously they come with some disadvantage of their own, but these are some of the material challenges which are faced by all these electrolyzers. In case of alkaline, as we saw already, they can use low cost nickel based catalysts. They need not depend on platinum, but they have slower dynamics as compared to PEM, which is proton exchange membrane, which comes with a Nafion type membrane, which is very costly, and there is a raw material shortage for Nafion, and is also high cost membrane. Solid oxide disadvantage, as I said, is high temperature at which it has to operate. So at high temperature, thermal expansion mismatch will be there, material stability will be an issue. Again, the emerging one, which is alkaline type electrolyzer with the membrane. It comes with a solid membrane which both acts as electrode as well as separator. So this has a potential for non-noble metals where you can replace platinum. You need not go for platinum based electrodes. Okay, now I will just go to the last part of these are some of the materials which can be used, but what I wanted to show you before that is hydrogen production from wastewater. So hydrogen production of wastewater is one of the areas where India can focus, because we generate a lot of wastewater, and instead of going for freshwater electrolysis, you can always have technologies which can help in wastewater treatment as well as hydrogen production. So when you use this, when you use a wastewater for hydrogen production, obviously you can't take the water as such and put it in your electrolyzer. That will spoil the electrolyzer in first run itself. Okay, so what are there are some series of steps which you need to follow. Basically treatment steps, but this is to polish the water which you have so that you can feed it into an electrolyzer and it need not spoil your electrolyzer. Okay, so what are those basic steps? Screening, pH adjustment, because you need to know whether you are feeding it in a acid electrolyzer or an alkaline electrolyzer. Heavy metals, toxins should be removed. These are some of the methods which can be used for that. Precipitation, adsorption using activated carbon, which is a large surface area carbon. Salinity and chlorine management, which should avoid, because this is something which can lead to membrane fouling or degradation of membrane. So this is something which has to be taken care of from wastewater. Organic load reduction, again by different methods like biological treatment or coagulation, flocculation. These are some methods of water treatment which can be done. Filtration to remove suspended solids so that it doesn't go and clog the membranes. Disinfection, especially because when you are using it in bioelectrical systems, then this will sometimes reduce the hydrogen production. So you need to suppress those microbes which can either foul the surface or consume hydrogen in bioelectrochemical systems. So this is an optional step. Obviously, storage and conditioning, where you stabilize the flow temperature, because all the hydrogen production normally, if it is industrial hydrogen production, this has to be a flow chamber. That means water should keep flowing and you will have a system where the flow has to be stabilized, temperature has to be stabilized, and only then it can be fed to the electrolyzer or bioreactor. So these are the steps which has to be followed before the water is fed into an electrolyzer. So one of the methods by which you can produce hydrogen from wastewater, there are different methods. One is either you clean the water entirely and then feed it into an electrolyzer, polish it and then fill it into an electrolyzer. So it's basically integrated wastewater treatment and then the electrolyzer. Okay, 2 steps. In this case, this is a research level, it has not been industrialized, but this is something called photocatalytic fuel cell, where you use 2 chambers, obviously one with anode and the other one with cathode, with a membrane in between. Now there is no external bias, as you can see, but it is something similar to what we saw in the previous photoelectrochemical setup. When light is incident, electron hole pairs will be generated. Electron flows through the outer circuit, goes to cathode, combines with H+. But when it has to produce hydrogen, this has to be an anaerobic environment. That means no oxygen. If oxygen is there, then the electron combines with oxygen and forms superoxide radical, which we don't want. We want hydrogen. If you want hydrogen production, then this chamber has to have an anaerobic environment. Okay. So in that case, electron will come and combine with H+. The H+ ions, where are they coming from? This side, through the exchange membrane. Okay. So here, when the light was incident, electron hole pairs were generated. Electron flew through the outer circuit. H+ or hole reacts with water to produce something called hydroxyl radical, not hydroxyl ion. Especially, why? Because you have fuel. What is that fuel here? The fuel is a combination of electrolyte plus the wastewater. Okay. Wastewater, as in it should not contain all those bigger waste particles. It can be wastewater but treated to the secondary level. Not fully treated wastewater, but initial steps of filtration and filtration or ozonization can be done. The first 2 steps. The last step, where you have organics in it. So that organic matter in the wastewater plus the electrolyte is actually the fuel here. So the chemical energy of that wastewater is broken down, is being converted into electricity. You see, if the electron flows through the outer circuit, you have power generation. Simultaneously, the hydroxyl radicals which are produced here, these H+ reacts with water to produce OH dot, which is hydroxyl radical. Hydroxyl radical is different from hydroxyl ion. Till now, when we were only dealing with electrolyzers, we were talking about hydroxyl ion, which is a charged radical. Hydroxyl radical is not charged. It has a extra electron, loosely bound electron. Okay, and that is the electron which, that is why that hydroxyl ion actually can break down the pollutants, because the extra electron which it has is very active and it can break down basically any type of organic pollutant. So photocatalytic fuel cells are something where you can produce hydrogen and you can also clean water simultaneously. Okay, in the photoelectrochemical cell which we saw, we were only producing hydrogen. When light was incident and you produce electron hole pairs were generated, hydrogen was produced at the cathode. But in this case, you can actually produce hydrogen and also clean water or break down the organic pollutants. Some pollutants which you can never break down using other methods. All the pollutants of emerging concerns. Okay. So, and how does this work? Again, because of the Fermi level difference between these 2 materials. This is cathode and this is the anode. There is a Fermi level difference between there, and that is why that is the one which is providing an internal bias for the electron to come to the other side. Okay. So if there is a difference at the Fermi level, electron flows from one side to the other. Is it clear? So this is something which is a basic of hydrogen production and wastewater treatment, a simultaneous method. Now, yes, we'll just go to the safety challenge and I'll stop with that. So what is the safety challenge with hydrogen? You know that it's extremely flammable. Why? Because it has a ultra low ignition energy. So the major concern with hydrogen production and storage is the safety aspect. Unfortunately, in India, we don't consider that. That is the last thing which we consider, but which should be the first thing to consider. Because in other labs, they will actually close down your lab if there's even a small leak of hydrogen happening in other countries. But this is what we take it for granted. So there are extreme steps which needs to be taken for safety of even while producing hydrogen, because some of the systems, pilot scale systems which are made even at the lab level have very high risk of hydrogen leakage. So special sensors should be installed, alarm systems should be installed before you actually go into hydrogen research, because that is something which will be needed if you have to have a hydrogen production, green hydrogen production system in future. So the key takeaways is hydrogen, the concepts are there. The problem is that materials have to be researched, and you have to come up with low cost materials. We can't be dependent on materials which are imported, just like we can't be dependent on oil which is imported. So you need to have more funds for R&D on hydrogen research in India. Most possible potential is that for hydrogen production from wastewater, because we generate tons and tons of wastewater. So if there is a system where you can integrate wastewater treatment with hydrogen production, that is the best for our country. Yes. Okay, so 2 questions we can have, and then we can discuss over tea if you want. Any doubts? Impurities as in, no. So that was not impurity present in electrode material. That is where, for example, if I take TiO2, TiO2 is a wide bandgap semiconductor. So when you want to make it into a narrow wide bandgap, that means you want to change the bandgap, you need to add some external element. That is what we call it as impurity. All of you have learned about semiconductor physics. You have an idea of semiconductor physics. So what do you tell the dopants, N-type dopant, P-type dopants, semiconductors? Twelfth, you don't have semiconductors. N-type semiconductor, P-type semiconductor. Any idea of N-type and P-type? Okay, semiconductor is something which has a conductivity between metal and insulator, okay? But as it is at room temperature, semiconductors will not conduct unless you give some form of energy in the form of light or in the form of an external bias. And since it is not a metal, it doesn't have free charge carriers. So how do you bring these charge carriers in semiconductors? By adding some other element in that. Okay, that it's a simple science, but I don't have time to explain now. So basically you dope. Dope means maybe approximately 1 atom in 10 to the power of 5 atoms of that semiconductor. So if I have silicon as such will not conduct much unless you add some dopant to that. If it is a silicon valency is 4. So if I add a 3+ element as impurity in that, it will have more holes as carriers and it becomes a P-type semiconductor. Similarly, if I add 5+, that is phosphorus or some other 5+ element, it will become a N-type semiconductor. So when I add this, the thing which I am adding is called a dopant. Silicon is the host. So this dopant, sometimes we call it as impurity. Okay, so it's not impurity as such, but it can have impurities if other than this dopant which I am saying. In case if it is having impurity, it can act as a trap for some of these carriers. So in that case, definitely it will reduce. Okay.
So both gray and blue hydrogen both can produce a lot of carbon dioxide, but blue hydrogen can store it in some way. But then why can't they apply the same principle to gray hydrogen?
So it's the same principle which, see, we are only segregating so there are let's say two industries. One is producing gray hydrogen, the other one is also producing gray hydrogen. This fellow is allowing everything in air, all the CO2 produced in air. So it's completely gray hydrogen. This company, whatever CO2 comes out, stores it. So we will call that as a blue hydrogen, because CO2 is not coming out. So you are just storing it away. You are not, it's not that you are not producing, you are producing, but you are storing it away. It's not polluting the air. It is polluting somewhere, but it's not polluting the air. So that is the difference. This is both, the process is same in both. It's the same gray hydrogen, but in this case, since you store away the CO2, you call it as blue hydrogen. You classify it as blue hydrogen.
Can we utilize this for carbon dioxide, which is
You can
we reutilize this for
CO2, yeah, you can, you can use it for certain industries. I think there are some industries which can use, but again, for that, you need to capture and use it. So there are some industries where you use CO2, but the rate of usage is very less compared to what you produce. Yeah. Some countries, they're already using. Germany, they have hydrogen powered vehicles. Okay. Some of the countries are already using it. For us, safety issue is there, storage issue is there. So we started a little late. So that is why government is funding research now. But we are a little late. We'll take some more time to reach there. Okay, shall we break with this for 5 minutes and come back? Thank you.